it's so empowering to people to have a voice, to be given a voice to tell their story. I think specifically with books, there is so much credibility that is given to your work when it's bound, when there's a physical quality object associated with the story that you've told. So I see all the time when I talk to an author for the first time and they say, I have this book idea, here's what I've got so far. I'm not sure if it's going to resonate with people. These are my reservations about the book, versus a year later, them pulling the books out of their first shipment of 100, pulling it out, holding it in their hands, and feeling just an overwhelming confidence, having it. There's just something about the physical that makes it a reality, right?
Welcome, everybody, to the Full Battery Media podcast. After some fun troubleshooting and changes, we jumped onto Google Meet today. So this is a little bit different for me, but why not, man? Do different things. It's fun to improvise. But I have an awesome guest with me today. Would you like to tell people who you are and a little bit about what you do?
Sure. My name is Madison Johnson. People call me Mads. I work at Greenleaf Book Group in our acquisitions and discovery department. Essentially, what I do is I oversee the submission review process for all of the manuscripts that get sent over, and pitch those to our team to decide which books we're going to publish. So I do a lot of info calls with authors, a lot of talking to people who are new to the process and sharing with them about what publishing looks like and what the next steps are for their book. It's a lot of fun. I get to talk to a lot of authors at the time when they're the most excited about their book. So I love my job.
That's awesome. Well, how did you first get into the world of books and storytelling? I mean, it's such a beautiful field, but how do you get started in something like that?
Yeah, I love that you use the word storytelling, because that really does kind of encompass all of the different things it can be. And I have done a handful of things on every side of it. I'd say I kind of got my start doing news journalism, copy editing. And then I worked in video games for a little while. If you know the choose your adventure episodes, app games, I used to write for those for a little while. And I mean, ultimately, I have always wanted to work with books. So I just applied at Greenleaf a handful of times, kind of had to stalk them a little bit before I got fired. But I've been working at Greenleaf for about 5 years now. And it's been a blast since I got my start working basically as everyone's assistant at the reception desk. And that was a really great experience to learn kind of the ins and outs of every department. I think a lot of people think of book publishing and they just think of editorial. They don't think about what marketing looks like, what sales looks like, what acquisitions looks like. And so that's helped me to get more well-rounded and understand the entire industry.
That's awesome. And it's interesting is because as a human, humanity's epic history, one of the first things that has always set people aside from the rest of creation is our storytelling. Whether it be cave paintings, whether it be writing epic ballads. Like right now, Christopher Nolan is getting ready to release the Odyssey, and one of the oldest books in human history. This is an oral tradition that's been around for thousands of years. And it's absolutely amazing that one of the oldest epics that, of mankind. And it started off with people that sitting around campfires, sharing these great stories. It's such a beautiful thing. And I think my point being, it's in our nature. It's part of who we are. Tell me more about your love for the storytelling.
Yeah, I think it's so interesting. There are so many people who don't think of themselves as literary people, who don't think of themselves as storytellers, or they don't think that the idea of being a critical reader appeals to them. They're the the curtains are just yellow in the book because they're yellow. It doesn't have to mean anything. But everybody dreams in symbolism. Like there's symbols and everyone thinks in that way, whether they're aware of it or not. So I think it's so interesting that fiction really in some capacity appeals to everybody. And I mean, beyond fiction, the way that we talk about real things, rhetorically, the way that we structure the way our art retelling of real things that happened or examining real things that happened, we're structuring it in a narrative way. That's just how our brains process it. So I'm so passionate about the history of literature, the history of history. I think it's a really interesting topic to think about how we evolved to communicate the way that we do. And to that end, I think there's so much value in fiction to resonate with people in a way that sometimes I think people are put off by something being too direct versus when it's fictionalized, they can get some distance from it and it's easier for them to kind of have their hearts changed maybe because with the barrier, they're able to more easily put themselves in someone else's shoes rather than it being a one-to-one kind of confrontation.
Yeah. Well, I love that because we are all brought up in our own little world, in our own little boxes. We grow up in that house that you grew up in. You then have the people around you. And some people are not given the opportunities to see the world at large. There was one interesting statistic that I read about this one city, and not great statistics, but the point of this is that they found that in this city, most of the people had not journeyed further than like 20 blocks away from where they were born. Mm-hmm. And like these people just all grew up, lived and died in one area. And it was wild to think about that because the whole world, when I say the word house, I have one idea, but someone else has another idea. When I love going to other places and to see the way houses look. I'm in Vietnam and I live in Vietnam part-time and then I live in the US part-time. But when I say the word house in Vietnam, I think of very tall, narrow buildings. Why? Land value is extremely high in Vietnam. And so people go, well, I own this land. I'm going to build a lot on this land. And they go straight up. Versus when I fly back to visit family in Boston and the houses are all kind of squarish so they can conserve heat with these tall roofs, and versus a house in California is going to be low and flat because they traditionally built low and flat because of earthquakes. You didn't need a peaked roof because there just wasn't snow. And the power of books is to understand that we get to see the world through someone else's eyes. We get to grow our empathy. I can sit there and go, oh, wow, I don't know what it's like to experience that. But by reading this book, I can kind of put myself into that character's experience. And so I love that because books are these giant empathy machines. And in a world in these days, we need more empathy than ever.
Yeah, I completely agree. The idea you brought up of us having our own sort of schema, you think about if you grow up in the Pacific Northwest, people from a young age are drawing trees that look like Christmas trees versus people on the East Coast are drawing them with bush top. And I think books for a lot of people in the communities they grow up are their earliest exposure to ideas that are different from the communities they were raised in. It's important to psychological development, to becoming a more well-rounded human and to understanding ideas that differ from what you were brought up with.
I love that. But what do you love most about helping people tell their stories?
Oh, that's such a hard question to choose from. I'd say what I love most is it's so empowering to people to have a voice, to be given a voice to tell their story. I think specifically with books, there is so much credibility that is given to your work when it's bound, when there's a physical quality object associated with the story that you've told. So I see all the time when I talk to an author for the first time and they say, I have this book idea, here's what I've got so far. I'm not sure if it's going to resonate with people. These are my reservations about the book, versus a year later, them pulling the books out of their first shipment of 100, pulling it out, holding it in their hands, and feeling just an overwhelming confidence, having it. There's just something about the physical that makes it a reality, right?
I love that because it's like, yeah. I mean, I think that there's this achievement thing that people don't always realize, that when you get to see something for the first time. I remember for me, it was a little different, but when I saw my first podcast episode go up on Spotify, and like, I was like, whoa, that's me. And that's my guest, and it's this tangible thing that you can have. And you see people, when I work with clients about creating, content or something, and they sit there and they come to me and they talk about the story that they've always wanted to tell, the channel they've always wanted to create. And then we do it. And then they see their name, they see the design, they see all these things, and they get this confidence. I love that you bring up the confidence, because they didn't think they could do it, but suddenly when they see it in their hand, see it in front of them, it's powerful.
Yeah, when it's just this idea that's bouncing around your head, or just this file on your computer, and you are entirely reliant on your own ability to give an elevator pitch in order for you to have proof that it's real. I understand why people get in their own heads about it, and they feel like, even though I've written this thing, it's not real yet, because nobody knows that it's real. Nobody can look at it and see it. But when your book on a shelf, when you're able to give it to someone and say, hey, I did this. I know you were asking about it. Here's your copy. There's just something really magical about it.
I remember, I'm a huge fantasy fan. Absolutely huge fantasy fan. And I absolutely love, I love anything fantasy, but I love Tolkien, love the wizarding world of Harry Potter. Not a huge fan of the Game of Thrones verse, but yeah, each their own. But one of the things that I think about is there was a day where Tolkien sat down with an idea. And it's a wild thing for J.R.R. Tolkien, in the Lord of the Rings and stuff. He started that. He was a linguist who created this language. And then he's like, you know what? I need a world for my language. So he invented the world of the Lord of the Rings, because he already had created Elvish. And he's like, for the Lord of the Rings, let's make a world for this, Same thing, like Harry Potter is getting ready to get remade, and it's part of the, of our people understand who Harry is. The lightning bolt, you see a bunch of kids for Halloween with that lightning bolt on their head, and they know who that is. But like at one point in time, it was a thought that someone had. And whatever that story is, you can pick the biggest books in history, the greatest books in history. There was a time where George Orwell, not the real name, but like the writer, was sitting down and thinking about, what was George Orwell's real name again? Oh, can't even remember right? It's one of those 8th grade like things that I had to remember. But you had this writer that was sitting down and had an idea. And then they said, let's make this become something. Now, that leads to my next question. When someone says, I want to write a book, what is the first thing that you tell them?
Well, I guess the first thing that I tell them, wait, real quick, I wanted to touch on, I love that you brought up Tolkien, because that's a great example of, he wrote Lord of the Rings basically in response to his experience in the war, having had all of these close friendships and having lost so many of the people close to him. And that was almost a coping mechanism and a love language for him to write the story about this fellowship of all of these men who work together, and practically everybody lives at the end. And I just think that's such a beautiful translation. I'm a huge Lord of the Rings fan, so I love that you brought that.
I'm glad. I like to meet other people, because like I was reading the other day, and George R. R. Martin, which great books. He explored different concepts, but he was like, I think the Lord of the Rings is too happy. It's too this, it's too hopeful. And I was like, man, sometimes we need that. Sometimes we need that.
Yes. In the time when it was released, I think that a lot of people really needed it.
Right. It really did, But again, and here's the thing, because and circling back to the question I had to you, and I will find ways, now that I know that you like Lord of the Rings, I will find ways to circle back in this entire conversation to that. But, everyone has a story to tell. At that time, they did need to hear that story. And it was the story that was needed at that time. And I think that this is the type of thing, and this is, again, we need more stories. We're getting a lot of new content being put out, and AI is generating things for people. But my daughter was watching YouTube videos the other day, and some of it was just spam. And so I was like, we need people to be telling their stories still, to be sharing their imagination still. But again, how do people start this process? Because so many people, someone else, Tolkien was amazing, but I can't do that. Sure, you can.
Right. Yeah. I'd say when someone tells me I want to write a book, my first question is why? I think a lot of people, they decide in their head, I'm so excited to write a book. This is what it's going to be about. This is what I'm going to do. They're all about the what. They're fired up. They want to just jump right in. And I do think a lot of people sometimes forget to consider, why am I doing this? What am I trying to accomplish with this? Who am I writing it for? And when you do those things out of order, one of two things happens. If you're not centering the why, then either your passion and your excitement at the start of the project is going to peter out, and you're going to abandon the project because you forget why you were doing it to begin with. Who am I trying to reach? If you're not centering an end in mind, then once the passion and the infatuation with the project dies out, which will happen, it goes on for long enough that there's no amount of motivation that can sustain you all the way to the end of writing the book and publishing the book and promoting the book. So you really need to have in your mind why you're doing it. And the other circumstance that can happen if you're not centering the why is you do run through this, you barrel down the process, you write your manuscript, and then you realize at the end of it that this book is kind of not written for anybody. I see that a lot. People get to the end of writing it and they've kind of written it for themselves. It's more akin to a diary, or they've written a book that they would like to read without thinking, why would somebody pick this up? Why am I the person to be writing this book? And particularly if you're going the nonfiction route, really want to be thinking about your target audience and what they're going to be walking away from. And that should really be at the focus as you're planning out the writing process.
I love that. And I think that if you're not thinking about those things, because you're right, it is a process. And I see this because I work in media and content, and people will start their channels, and there's a long time where things don't go anywhere, and I remember one of the things that I remember reading about Tolkien, and when he wrote The Hobbit, for the first couple publications, it went nowhere. It was very minimal printings, and he had very few people that, but yet he persisted and he moved on to The Lord of the Rings. He started writing further and he kept going. And it really is this, if you do not have a why, it is very difficult to keep going. It is very difficult to push through, because I think the stories are important enough to be told. And I think that the most important thing is to know your why. Right now, I want to tell you the truth. I scheduled this early in the morning because we have construction going on next door, and they always start at 8. And I timed it much. And today they started at 7.
Oh, great.
It is loud. They are hammering things and they're going at it. But for me, this is an important conversation. I love storytelling. And like when we had some problems with Riverside, we had some challenges at the beginning of this conversation. But for me, and I want to use this as an illustration point because it is important for me. Telling stories is important for me. I live in the world of content, and I see that we have all of these content creators now. But one of the things that I hope and believe that people can find is that at the end of the day, are you a storyteller? You know, and I think if we can get more people to realize that they are storytellers, there is power in that.
Mm-hmm. There's something to be said, I'll say, for toiling in obscurity a little bit. I don't think necessarily that it is a bad thing to get started with a project and not know what direction you're going in it, because that's how you find your voice. I think the people who start a podcast, who start a YouTube channel, who start creating content without really knowing exactly who they're doing it for or what's going to resonate, I think that that's part of the creative process, and perfectly natural and great for you to figure out what is resonating with people. What direction do I want to go with? But particularly for writing a book, I bring that up because it can be a lot of fun to write around and see what works and throw everything at the wall. But I want to make people aware in the planning process that if you don't start out with the why in mind, particularly with a long form piece, you're going to have a lot of editing on your hands at the end, which can be fun too. It's a matter of what you want to spend your time on. But a lot of people come out of that process with like 3 times the length of book that they want to have and a lot of cutting down to do.
This is the truth. You know, it's like getting back to the Lord of the Rings. I am a huge fan of the director's cut, the long, and we're talking the movie here now, not the book. I love the books, but the movies, you know, I love the director's cut. And there was this post on Instagram, and it's like, no one can sit through all 3 of the director's cuts in one day. And like this person was like looking at the camera like, oh, really now? You know, why I bring that up is that stories, great stories, you know, do again take a lot of time to feel out. And, you know, you have to have that why you're going through, because, you know, when they made those movies, you know, and I'm sure, and I look at all of the extra stuff Tolkien has, you know, he had so much. The Silmarillion, you know, there was all of his other writings that were never finished, and he just didn't have a space to put them, you know, so he had to trim down. And, you know, and they're right. Like most people can't sit through a 5-hour movie, you know, and yet that was what they filmed, what they had. So you have to trim it back, and you have to have that why, and you have to have that clarity. So, you know, it's really interesting that we're talking about this, because when you have that why, you can start to think about something else. And this is one of the things that I have a question. And for you, and what makes a story stay when readers long after they finish it? Why do we remember some stories? Why are we still talking about the Lord of the Rings today when it was so long ago? And other books have come and gone and faded, but you know, some of them stay. Why is that? Why do some stories stay?
Yeah, I think that anchoring it in the personal is what resonates with people, whether that is explicit, whether that's you've written a prescriptive advice book that's rooted in your own experiences and you refer back to, this was what I was going through when I learned this. This was how I applied it in my life, and you can use that as a model for how you can apply it in your life. Or whether it's fiction that is rooted in the author's real experiences, the real relationships that they had, the real emotional pulls that they've felt in their own life, and then translated onto the page. I think when your writing is rooted in reality, that's when people are able to feel and resonate with the real aspect of it. It sticks with you because you think, man, I'm just like Frodo. I feel exactly, even though I have never climbed up that mountain, even though I have never, you can relate to the feelings as they're described, to the trials as they're described, to the relationships as they're described. And the emotional pull there is what, at least in my experience, in my hearing from other people of what their favorite books are, what has changed their worldview. It's what you took away in your own life from what you were able to feel from the author on the page.
I love that. Do you think anyone can be an author, or does it take something specific? Is there a certain amount of grit that people have to finish? What does it take?
I have battled with this question. I think there are a lot of people who say anyone can be an author, and literally that is true. I mean, in this age of self-publishing, there's a very low barrier to entry to becoming an author if you want to become an author. And I am very much in support of the democratization of the publishing process that has happened. There are so many more avenues these days than there were, I mean, even 10, 15 years ago, for authors to own their work and to advocate for their work and to get their work in front of readers. But that said, I do think it takes a special kind of person to have the combination of skill and determination and motivation and the instinct to surround yourself by with other talented people to outsource and to choose the right partners. I think it takes a very special combination of those things to be a successful author. I do think, I truly believe that if you have the motivation and the meaningful story to share, then if you find the right partners, I think you can be a successful author. But I talk about this all the time because I have been struggling in my own life to stay motivated to write. I think I'm good at writing. I don't think I'm a good writer. I'm not good at doing the writing part. And so there are a lot of critics out there who, will clown on those really prolific authors that you see in airport bookstores and the Colleen Hoovers and the Stephen Kings of the world. And they say, oh, they can't even write. They just churn out the same blah, blah, blah. But the fact of the matter is that they are writing and they are publishing their work. And we can sit here and be armchair critics all we want, but it's about 5% inspiration, 95% motivation.
Yeah. I caught myself doing that this morning. I was with an author I like, which blew me away. But I really enjoy the author, Ryan Holiday. And he writes The Obstacle's the Way, these types of stoic books. It's mindset, self-help type stuff. And then it was like, I got this email. Ryan Holiday's new book is out. And I just thought in my mind, wow, he's got another one? And I was like, hang on, I enjoy this guy. What is that judgment, coming through? Because it is powerful. The people that actually write, writers that are doing it, it takes this resilience. It takes this gut. I remember when I was a kid going and seeing all the Louis L'Amour, and he wrote all of these Western novels, and I don't even know if they were good or not. There were so many of them, and you sit there and you think about it. That's a lot of writing. That's a lot of dedication to diving into this world and telling stories.
Mm-hmm. And writing is really only the half of being an author. A lot of people think, oh my gosh, I've worked for years. I've written this book. Now the hard part is over because it's with a publisher. Really, the marathon is just starting. You now have to be the promoter. You have to show up for your book. You have to promote and be present and, again, advocate for it. So it's a business. If you want to be a successful author, then you need to think about your book, not just as your baby and as this story that you've written, but also as a product. So again, I think that's a special kind of combination of person who can be really successful at that.
I love that. What's one mistake people make when they start writing their story?
I would say writing in a vacuum is really common. People that kind of means one of two things. For the most part, I think writers are a little bit introverted. When they're getting started, they're a little bit shy. Sometimes they want to have a good proof of concept before they start talking to people about it. And so they go to a cabin in the woods, they hole up in the library, they write in in private, in the dark, just tapping away at their keyboard and put a ton of work into it before they have talked about their idea to anybody, before they've talked to an editor or to another author, someone who has the experience of writing a book. And a lot of times that can mean that you are writing yourself in the wrong direction. There are some developmental notes that you could get from early on in the process that would save you a lot of time and heartache, compared to just, writing alone, only hearing your own thoughts, not having a diversity of views. And the other part of writing in a vacuum is not experiencing other viewpoints by doing your research, by looking up, are there other books on this topic out there? What are other authors like me writing about? How are they doing? How's it being received? I think that you do yourself a major disservice by not doing some of that field work before you get started, because you may find that you are writing a book that already exists. You may find that another author has already covered this in a way where, a reader's going to go to them and not to you. And there might be a better subject for you out there. So it's really helpful, I think, to talk about it, to maybe think about talking to a book coach or an editor, or at the least, going to ChatGPT and figuring out what already exists before you dive all the way in.
Right. How can someone find their voice and make their story feel like real? Because I write one way and my way is my way. And I kind of have evolved into that. But how can someone figure out? Because let me make a better example. I remember when I was younger, I took acting classes. And we were in this acting class and the student was doing a scene from this movie called Boiler Room. And they were playing the character that was done by Giovanni Ribisi. And Giovanni Ribisi was this famous actor in the 2000s, early 2000s. And he had this style, this way of doing everything. And I remember that when I was observing this class, this master teacher saw this guy came in and he channeled Giovanni Ribisi perfectly. He channeled him perfectly. And when I watched it, I was like, dude, this guy, and all of us watching were like, this guy just nailed it. He was exactly Giovanni Ribisi. And the teacher ripped him apart. And we were like, wait, what? And I was watching. I was like, what? She's like, I hated your performance. And I was like, what? And she's like, yes, you came across as Giovanni Ribisi. Yeah, we all know what you were trying to do. But she's like, I'm going to tell you a secret. If they want to cast Giovanni Ribisi, they'll cast Giovanni Ribisi. They don't want you to be Giovanni Ribisi. She's like, I didn't want you to be Giovanni Ribisi. I wanted you to take the same words and to figure out how you would do it. What would be your way of doing it? And I just had this aha moment, like, oh man, I don't have to copy that guy. And maybe you become the celebrity impersonator, but that's not what you want to do. You want to be you. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's a great example. In auditions and stuff, that's why a lot of times they prefer to hear Shakespeare or something where you're drawing from the influence of the script itself rather than doing a scene from TV or movie where there's one example of how an actor did it and any other interpretation sometimes feels wrong because you know exactly how it's supposed to sound in your head. I love that example. My unhelpful kind of advice for how to find your voice and make your writing feel real is, I'm sorry, but you just have to write a lot.
I love
it. It's going to come through. You don't necessarily need to be writing a lot of long form stuff. I highly encourage people to think about where you're writing in your life that is in work, in correspondence with friends and family, how you have a sense of a voice in the way that you're talking one-on-one to somebody, in the way that you're talking to groups. If you're someone who speaks for a living, you have your voice. Finding your writing voice is very similar to doing that. You're maybe more practiced in speaking than you are in writing. But when you just sit down at a keyboard or with a pen and paper and try it, it's going to come through. I have really enjoyed, if you are someone who is interested in short story writing or in fiction writing, Readsy does a really cool weekly short story contest. They send around 5 prompts that you can write from. I think that's a great way to practice in a low stakes environment, getting in the habit of writing and also learning different ways to tackle and approach a prompt. And another way to find your voice going off of that is to post regularly on a platform of your choice. Substack is really great right now. Posting on LinkedIn, short articles. If you have a blog, if you have a newsletter, again, short form, and you can see through engagement what kind of subjects and what style of writing is resonating with people the best. And through interacting with the people who comment with you, comment on your posts, who are talking with you, that gives you a little more sense of your voice as well, and what makes the most sense for you to approach with a book. If you're posting about something and nobody cares, probably not a good idea to write a book on it.
One of the things that I was thinking about too was what we had just talked about was the difference between, are you writing something for yourself or are you writing something that people want? Like the difference between, maybe the writer or the creator, was it Philip K. Dick? I think it was the name, The Dream of Electric Sheep. I can't remember it was the precursor to Blade Runner. The book was very powerful, but was that something that people, if they were posting that on a forum, would that be the thing that people said they wanted to read? Or should you just write what you feel inspired to write? Like, so where do you think though? Do you always try to make people happy, or do you write things that you think should be written? Because sometimes the general consensus is not, because like right now I see online there are trends that are not good trends, and like, do you match that, or do you write something that is original?
That is a really good question. I would say it all depends on what your goals are as a writer and as an author. If your goals are to resonate with your target audience, to reach what your network is looking for, to satisfy an appetite, then I do think that you want to pay attention more to what's trending, what's maybe not yet trending, but that in your industry is going to become a big deal in the next year, in the next 5 years. But if you are more interested in the art of writing, if you're just writing for pleasure, which again, I'm speaking a little bit more about market trends because I work in publishing and we are in the business of selling books, of course. But I by no means would I discourage someone from writing what they're interested in and what excites them, and a book that they think should exist. It's just a matter of, is your goal to write a book that you are incredibly proud of, that you have been dreaming about, an idea that's been in your head for many years? Write it. Who cares if that's not something that's going to reach people? Who cares if you get 10 sales, if you put it up on Amazon? If your motivation is just to write a beautiful book and do it very well, I think that is a very worthwhile endeavor. And every now and then those really land as well. I mean, there are still, I know that the industry, it feels like it's shrunk so much, and it feels like, especially with fiction and with literary fiction, things are predetermined sometimes. And with New York Times bestseller lists, it's kind of a taste-making thing. I'd say, level your expectations, but if your book reaches one person and resonates with them and changes everything for them, then I think that that's a job well done, and that is a success. So just, look within and see what are your motivations for doing the writing. If it's to be a tool for your business and to reach your network, that's one thing. If it is to do something that you're really very proud of, that you have wanted to do, if it's an art form for you, that's a completely separate thing. No one is painting a picture and asking, am I going to be able to sell it for $1 million? Is it even worth it to paint it? Right.
You just paint it because you have to. Yeah.
Right.
At the end of the day, if you could go back and give some advice to your younger self on your own journey, what advice would you give yourself?
I would say to myself, people are giving you opportunities because they want you to succeed. I think, at least for me, I have a tendency to get in my own head when it comes to confidence, and think, oh my gosh, this is outside of my comfort zone. I don't know if I'm going to do well at this. Is this a setup? Am I going to trip and fall? But, I mean, people want to see you succeed, and, having opportunities available to you. I think that if someone knocks on your door, you should open it. And I have learned more in the past few years by saying yes to things and by having conversations with people who I maybe in the moment didn't quite feel qualified to talk to. That has helped me to grow as a person and as a professional more than ever.
I love that. Where can people look for more information about you, or hear about you, or find out about what you're doing?
Yeah. So I work in publishing. I work at the book publisher, Greenleaf Book Group. We publish all genres. If you are interested in writing a book, learning how to write a book, if you have a manuscript and you want us to take a look and see if we are a good fit as a publisher, you can go to greenleafbookgroup.com and submit your work anytime, or contact me and I'll say hi, and I'm happy to schedule a call. I'm also on LinkedIn. I'm posting a lot about industry trends, common misconceptions authors have, just kind of some behind the scenes stuff. I know I have a very common name, but if you search Madison Johnson Publishing, hopefully I'll pop up. I think it's so interesting. There are so many people who don't think of themselves as literary people, who don't think of themselves as storytellers, or they don't think that the idea of being a critical reader appeals to them. They're like, the curtains are just yellow in the book because they're yellow. It doesn't have to mean anything. But everybody dreams in symbolism. Like, there's symbols, and everyone thinks in that way, whether they're aware of it or not. So I think it's so interesting that fiction really in some capacity appeals to everybody. And I mean, beyond fiction, the way that we talk about real things, rhetorically, the way that we structure the way our art retelling of real things that happened or examining real things that happened. We're structuring it in a narrative way. That's just how our brains process it. I'm so passionate about the history of literature, the history of history. Um, I think it's a really interesting topic to think about how we evolved to communicate the way that we do. And um, to that end, I think there's so much value in fiction to resonate with people in a way that um, sometimes I think people are put off by something being too direct versus when it's fictionalized, they can get some distance from it and it's easier for them to uh, kind of have their hearts changed maybe because with the barrier, they're able to more easily put themselves in someone else's shoes rather than it being a one-to-one kind of confrontation. The idea you brought up of us having our own sort of schema, you think about if you grow up in the Pacific Northwest, people from a young age are drawing trees that look like Christmas trees versus
Yep.
people on the East Coast are drawing them with bush top. Um, and I think books for a lot of people in the communities they grow up are their earliest exposure to ideas that are different from the communities they were raised in. It's important to psychological development, to becoming a more well-rounded human and to understanding ideas that differ from what you were brought up with. it's so empowering to people to have a voice, to be given a voice to tell their story. I think specifically with books, there is so much credibility that is given to your work when it's bound, when there's a physical quality object associated with the story that you've told. So I see all the time when I talk to an author for the first time and they say, I have this book idea, here's what I've got so far. I'm not sure if it's going to resonate with people. These are my reservations about the book, versus a year later, them pulling the books out of their first shipment of 100, pulling it out, holding it in their hands, and feeling just an overwhelming confidence, having it. There's just something about the physical that that makes it a reality, right? When someone tells me I want to write a book, my first question is why? I think a lot of people, they decide in their head, I'm so excited to write a book. This is what it's going to be about. This is what I'm going to do. They're all about the what. They're fired up. They want to just jump right in. And I do think a lot of people sometimes forget to consider, why am I doing this? What am I trying to accomplish with this? Who am I writing it for? And when you do those things out of order, one of two things happens. If you're not centering the why, then either your passion and your excitement at the start of the project is going to peter out and you're going to abandon the project because you forget why you were doing it to begin with. Who am I trying to reach? If you're not centering an end in mind, then once the passion and the infatuation with the project dies out, which will happen, it goes on for long enough that there's no amount of motivation that can sustain you all the way to the end of writing the book and publishing the book and promoting the book. So you really need to have in your mind why you're doing it. I don't think necessarily that it is a bad thing to get started with a project and not know what direction you're going in it, because that's how you find your voice. I think the people who start a podcast, who start a YouTube channel, who start creating content without really knowing exactly who they're doing it for or what's going to resonate, I think that that's part of the creative process, and perfectly natural and great for you to figure out what is resonating with people. What direction do I want to go with? But particularly for writing a book, I bring that up because it can be a lot of fun to write around and see what works and throw everything at the wall. But I want to make people aware in the planning process that if you don't start out with the why in mind, particularly with a long form piece, you're going to have a lot of editing on your hands at the end, which can be fun too. It's a matter of what you want to spend your time on. But a lot of people come out of that process with like 3 times the length of book that they want to have and a lot of cutting down to do. Anchoring it in the personal is what resonates with people, whether that is explicit, whether that's you've written a prescriptive advice book that's rooted in your own experiences and you refer back to, this was what I was going through when I learned this. This was how I applied it in my life. And you can use that as a model for how you can apply it in your life, or whether it's fiction that is rooted in the author's real experiences, the real relationships that they had, the real emotional tolls that they've felt in their own life, and then translate it onto the page. I think when your writing is rooted in reality, that's when people are able to feel and resonate with the real aspect of it.